Greetings, class, and welcome back to Chordates Part 2. In this section of the notes, we'll talk about the highest order of vertebrates, if you will, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals, that have all made the complete jump to dry land and are terrestrial based. When we finished up the last unit, we finished out with the last part of the first set of notes. We ended up talking about amphibians, and we said amphibians were adapted for living on dry land, but they were not able to make the entire leap to dry land because they were still limited by their skin, by the fact that their eggs had to be laid near the water. So even though they do undergo an incredible metamorphosis and basically change from an aquatic organism to a terrestrial organism, they were not really able to conquer the land like the reptiles were. The reptiles truly conquered the land. That's the first group we're going to look at today. Reptiles are ectothermic vertebrates, not unlike the amphibians. They have lungs, but one of the very cool adaptations that they have is scaly skin. Several adaptations you need to have when you think about it to make the jump to dry land and stay. You have to be able to retain water. You have to be able to produce eggs that can survive on dry land. So you had to be able to breathe efficiently on dry land. So these things all had to be accomplished, and they were accomplished by the reptiles. So consequently, the reptiles were able to literally conquer the land because they could leave the water and they didn't have to come back. Reptiles also have lungs for breathing on dry land. These guys can spend their entire lives on dry land. And as I said, these are the first well-adapted vertebrates to live completely on dry land. And why? They have the scaly skin, which retains moisture. They have the kidneys, which are very efficient at separating out good liquid from bad liquid, so that way the maximum amount of moisture and water is retained in the body. And then they also have the egg, a special type of egg called the amniotic egg. This is a humongous evolutionary leap. This egg has a shell, and that shell actually keeps the moisture trapped inside so that these eggs can be laid completely on dry land. And it's a fascinating structure because it's porous, but the pores are just the correct size to allow for the exchange of gases, but to keep the moisture trapped inside. So this is a huge evolutionary development. Now the reptiles were pretty much able to go anywhere they wanted. These are the different groups of reptiles. You guys are probably familiar with these. You've seen these guys before. This is the reptile egg right here. Huge development. The amniotic egg with the shell here. And look at all these different types of membranes designed to do things like protect the egg, to store moisture, to store food for the developing embryo, which you can see inside there. You can also see different membranes that allow for a gas exchange and the collection of waste materials, and airspace. And you can also see many of those characteristics that define this as a chordate. You can see the pharyngeal gill slits, the developing backbone, and the postanal tail. But this development, the shell, humongous development, because now they could live on dry land. Not only could they stay on dry land and keep the moisture intact inside the egg, the shell also provides considerable amount of protection in its design, for marauders and predators that were to rummage through the nest. Now, the descendants of the reptiles are the birds. The birds are the first organisms that we look at that are endothermic, which means they can maintain their own body temperature. They're not dependent on their environment, and their behaviors are not dictated so much by the temperature because they don't really care as much. They can keep their temperature controlled, whether it's hot or cold, from the inside. Now, birds are the first organisms that we look at in the chordate family that can fly. Not all birds, but the majority of birds can fly. And they do this with a structure called the feather, which you see in no other organisms. There are two different types of feathers. You have down feathers and contour feathers. The down feathers are short, very soft and fluffy. These are designed specifically to trap heat. That's why they're great for having in jackets, blankets, and pillows. And then the contour feathers, which are specially designed for flight. These guys have a four-chambered heart. Unlike amphibians and reptiles, well, with the exception of the crocodilians, those guys, remember, have a three-chambered heart. But a three-chambered heart would not cut it for birds. Birds have too much metabolic stuff going on. They need a lot of oxygen, and they need to continually being pumped through their body. So a four-chambered heart is what they have, and the two-loop circulatory system. And these guys also lay an amniotic egg, similar to the reptiles. And let's compare the hearts here in the circulatory system. Remember, we started with the fish first, single loop, two-chambered heart. Then we looked at the amphibians, 2-loop circulatory system, much more efficient, but still only 3 atria. That ventricle area has some mixing of good and bad blood. But look at what happens when you get to the birds and then later the mammals. 4-chambered heart, 2 ventricles now. So there's no mixing of good and bad blood. That's completely separated out because birds can't have periods of time where they have low oxygen in their circulatory system. They need a continual supply of fresh oxygen for all that respiration that's going on. So this is the most efficient type of circulatory system we see in the animal kingdom. Now birds, few interesting things they have. Of course, we mentioned the 4-chambered heart. They traditionally have a proventriculus and a ventriculus, which is like a storage chamber, and then a stomach or gizzard to process the food. They have highly efficient lungs with air sacs, which you can see here, to store extra oxygen, especially when you're getting up in those high altitudes and the oxygen supply is not easily available. They also have lightweight bones, much less than animals like ourselves or cows or things like that, because they need to be lightweight so they can fly. If the bones were solid, thick masses, it would be impossible for them to be able to get off the ground. On the external anatomy, as we mentioned, they have special feathers called flight feathers. Their claws and bills are both adapted for their lifestyle. By looking at the bill and the claws, you can tell a lot about a bird, how they feed, how they capture their prey, where they live, all that kind of stuff. And then, as we mentioned before, the body, the breast area, this area around here, is insulated with the down feathers, which of course this is the area that you need to keep the body's heat trapped inside, especially when you're high up in that atmosphere where it can be really, really cool. These are the adaptations that birds have for flight. They have, of course, the lightweight bones, which we mentioned, the specially designed feathers, which create the shape here you see, which is called an airfoil, imitated by humankind in the design of our wings of our planes. It's longer over the top than it is on the bottom, which causes the air to move faster over the top than the bottom. This creates something called the Bernoulli effect, in which the air moving on top basically is exerting less pressure than the air on the bottom. So the air on the bottom actually pushes, which causes the bird to lift up. So those feathers also are designed to be hooked together and latched together with hooks and barbs, almost like a nature's version of Velcro. Kind of stole that idea from them as well. That's why from time to time birds have to preen to make sure that the wing feathers are all intact and smooth so the air can pass over properly and that they're latched together. And then of course you can see here the hollow bones with the air spaces to make them nice and light. No extra teeth to worry about with extra weight as well. This way the birds can fly. Now the last group we'll look at are the mammals, which of course includes us. These guys are also endothermic. Bodies are covered with some type of hair. The young are nourished after birth with milk secreted from the mom in an organ called the mammary gland, which is where the mammal name comes from. These guys are lung breathers. They have a special type of muscle called the diaphragm that separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. That muscle is responsible for helping your chest expand and contract so you can breathe. We of course have the 4-chambered heart, 2 pairs of limbs for locomotion, and a highly developed brain. There are 3 different distinct lines of mammals, but you can tell a lot about a mammal by looking at their skulls. You can look at the positioning of the eyes to get a little bit of an idea about their lifestyle, but you can also look at the teeth. What types of teeth do they have in terms of if they're omnivores, herbivores, or carnivores? Sharp teeth would be a good indicator that they're probably carnivorous or maybe omnivorous. Flat teeth would be a good indication, like in the case of the horse, that they're primarily grinders and eating grasses and leafy material. Now the 3 different lines of mammals include the monotremes. These are the most primitive mammals. Not a lot of these species, but these guys actually, believe it or not, still lay eggs. And some examples include the spiny anteater and the duck-billed platypus. Placental mammals. This is the vast majority of mammals, which includes us. The young are attached to the mother by the placenta, from which they get their oxygen and nutrients. They can exchange wastes. And then the young develop inside their mother, and when they're born, they're very far along compared to some other types of animals. And like I said, that includes humans, dogs, cows, etc., etc. And then the last group, the marsupials. These are relatively primitive types of mammals as well, because the young are born partially developed. So they're kind of immature, and then they're pulled inside the pouch, and then that's where they finish their development, nursing, and growing it to the point where they're ready to survive on their own. These include possums and kangaroos and koalas. And I believe that's the last slide, which completes the unit and completes the notes for the year. Thank you all for being part of my class, and I hope you enjoyed the class, and I hope you have a wonderful summer.